California is still going to defy federal orders regarding trans athletes in school sports. Is Newsom ready to drill, baby drill? And LA continues to see more crackdowns from ICE and Border Patrol, and Karen Bass goes full Karen mode. So let's get into that all on tonight's episode of the California Underground Podcast, starting right now. What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the California Underground Podcast, the most trusted podcast for all things California politics. I am your host, Phil. We have a ton of stuff to get to tonight. Three big stories, one involving trans athletes in school sports and how California continues to defy federal orders from the Department of Education under the Trump administration. We're also going to get into whether or not California is ready to drill, baby, drill and start producing more oil here in the state to help with gas prices. And LA continues to see crackdowns by ICE and Border Patrol, and Karen Bass has nothing else to do but go full Karen mode and use it as a publicity stunt. So let's get started. And before we do, make sure if you are new here, make sure you like, share, subscribe, review, all that stuff. It helps with the algorithm. So thank you, everyone. We are live on YouTube, X, IG, a whole bunch of different places, Rumble, I believe, as well. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and thank everyone for hanging out in the chat tonight. I'll make sure to get to all of your chats and stuff like that throughout the show. But let's get first started in our first story. So news broke yesterday that California, the Department of Education here in California, basically said, we are not going to comply with the federal orders of the Department of Education, the federal Department of Education under the Trump administration, regarding trans athletes in school sports. And this is obviously probably no surprise to most people who have been paying attention to politics here in California, that this has become sort of a hot button issue. We're going to get into a little bit of why maybe Democrats are on the wrong side of this issue, but I do want to get into this story first off. This is from the Sacramento Bee. Goes on to say that California will not ban transgender athletes from competing in K through 12 school sports or change its anti-discrimination policies to exclude them, becoming the second state after Maine to defy the Trump administration over the issue. U.S. Education Secretary Linda McMahon gave California 10 days from June 27th to rescind any sports prizes awarded to trans athletes and ban them after the agency's Office of Civil Rights said that the state had violated federal anti-discrimination law by allowing transgender girls to compete with cisgender girls. Now, if you see this picture, this was sort of what started it all. His name is A.B. Hernandez. This individual right here was one of the transgender girls to compete with cisgender girls. If you're as confused as I am, I always get confused as to what particularly is the language, but that started this whole issue here in California and the Trump administration's crackdown of it. The California Interscholastic Federation, which governs school sports, piloted a program last month allowing cisgender female athletes to advance to a statewide championship track meet if they lost a qualifying position to a trans competitor after President Donald Trump singled out a 16-year-old high jumper, A.B. Hernandez, online. For more than a decade, California has allowed student athletes to use any facility and play on sports teams that reflect their gender identity. That law enacted way back in 2013 under former Democratic Governor Jerry Moonbeam. Article goes on to say California's refusal to violate its own laws now tees it up for a potential court battle over whether federal law prevents states from enacting laws protecting all students, including transgender one, according to Shannon Minter, the director of San Francisco-based National Center for LGBTQ Rights. All right. There's a lot of stuff to unpack here. If you are not really familiar with the story, they mention this, the California Interscholastic Federation. And I want to just point out who the California Interscholastic Federation is, because I didn't know who this CIF was. I want to make sure that they're not a government entity. So they are not a government entity. I thought they were part of the state. They were part of the government. That is not the case. They are actually a nonprofit that you buy membership into this California Interscholastic Federation. And they have created this pilot program regarding transgender athletes in school sports here in California. And I also had to dig in and see that CIF is not just for public schools, it's for private schools as well. Because again, it's not a government, it's not necessarily a government thing. It gets a tiny, tiny bit of government funding, but most of it, and as you can see right here, I'm pulling up, this is ProPublica. This is a great site if you want to look up any sort of charity. They give you all the information. So their revenue in 2024 was 9.46 million. Their total assets are 15 million. They expensed about 7.54 million. So a lot of this comes from different memberships. So schools pay to be a part of this organization, the CIF, and there's also receipts from championships. So it's a nonprofit that kind of governs everything. And the CIF started this pilot program regarding transgender athletes. And now, because the Trump administration and Linda McMahon, the U.S. Secretary of Education, said, no, we think this is a violation of Title IX. This is not fair to those girls who are competing in sports. You have about 10 days to comply with our rule. So that's who CIF is. Now, the California state is obviously standing by this because they think it's a hot button issue. That's a winning issue for them in, I don't know, the midterms as well as in 2028. The truth is that's not the case. And we're going to get to that in a second. I want to talk about whether or not they're setting themselves up to lose federal funding over this. Because if the Trump administration and the Department of Education at the federal level is saying, you violated this, we can now punish you because we can take federal education dollars away from you for not complying with basically our guidance, they could lose federal funding. And I just want to point this out. I had to look up the numbers. California receives about $16.3 billion in federal education funding. That's a lot of money. 16.3. Now, keep in mind, the budget deficit for this year was $12 billion. So losing $16.3 billion in federal education funding would be an enormous hole to fill. And if you remember, we talked about last week, they did some pretty unique ways of borrowing money to try and get and plug those holes for the budget to make it look like it was a balanced budget. That was $12 billion, and now it's $16.3 billion they could lose for federal funding. Just for scope alone, the city of Los Angeles gets about $1.6 billion annually. That's a lot of federal money. So they are definitely in danger of risking and losing all of that federal funding because they're not going to comply with what the Trump administration and the Department of Education is saying. Now, with that said, is it going to happen right now? Is it going to happen within the next week or two? This is, breaking news as of yesterday. A lot of the news was being reported this morning about this and how California is thumbing its nose at the federal government. I will burst your bubble right there. It's not going to happen almost immediately. I can guarantee you, and I think this has already been put out there by Gavin Newsom, that they are going to sue over this issue. They're going to take this to federal court. They're going to sue over it, saying that the Trump administration cannot do this and say that they are banned under transgender. They can ban these transgender athletes. So that's where it is right now. And I would imagine that a court is going to grant a preliminary injunction and TRO that would stop the federal government from implementing any sort of federal funding deduction because of the fact that they would be harmed if they lose their federal education funding until we figure this out. It's not fair that we do this. So I would just want to kind of temper everyone's expectations that even though the federal government says they're going to take away and likely take away a lot of their federal funding, this will be fought out in court. Now, if after a while, all of a sudden, they find out that they lose, then California could be in a huge mess because of how many years this could go on and how many years they're receiving federal funding in violation of these orders. And if the federal courts find that, yeah, you violate this order, they have the right to take federal funding from you, that could be a whole sticky situation for, well, probably likely the next governor, because in 2028, that's how long it's probably going to take. Or 2026 is right around the corner. So probably the next governor is going to have to figure out what they're going to do about this federal funding. So I did want to bring this up, though, really quickly. Let me see if I can pull this up, because I did want to show this. This is from this year, February 26, 2025. And this is why I brought up, it's an odd issue for California Democrats and Democrats in general to get behind as if this is some sort of big crusade issue. This was from February 2025. I believe we already talked about this on the show at some point. A new Pew Research Center survey finds that the majority of U.S. adults favor or strongly favor laws and policies that, one, require trans athletes to compete on teams that match their sex assigned at birth, and then also ban healthcare professionals from providing care related to gender transitions for minors. And this is why I say it is a lot of California Democrats and Democrats in general seem to be really on the wrong side of this issue. The majority, not a slim majority, the majority of U.S. adults who have been surveyed on this, 66%, are not in favor of trans athletes competing in sports that they're not the assigned gender. So example, here in California, this Hernandez, who competed against girls, who is a biological man, most Americans are not for that, and they're not in support of that. So what are California Democrats doing this for? Is it just another thing to thumb their nose at the Trump administration because they made it sort of a center point of their platform and what they've campaigned on? I don't know. But it didn't seem to help them in 2024. I don't know if it's going to help them in 2026. And I'm not sure it's going to help someone like Gavin Newsom in 2028 if this becomes the thing. Now, keep in mind, one of the most devastating ads that a lot of, they say highfalutin, professional political consultants said was really the death knell, or one of the biggest blows to the Kamala campaign, was the ad where Trump came, it was a Trump ad, and it said Kamala Harris is for they, them, and Donald Trump is for you. And that was one of the most devastating political ads that I think they showed. And a lot of people kind of saw that and were like, okay, that was a powerful message. And it worked. It worked really well for Donald Trump. Let's see if it works again in 2026 and 2028. Again, I'm not sure why this has become such a big issue or a sticking issue for California. But again, it's California. What would you expect? Would you expect anything less?